17 minutes until complete submersion. The Coast Guard engineer's voice cut through the storm like a death sentence. The Charleston Queen was sinking fast, her lower decks flooding, 12 crew members trapped in a maze of twisted metal and rising water. The elite rescue team stood helpless on the pier. Then Captain Frank Wilson, dismissed as a senile old fool just hours before, grabbed an oxygen tank and said the words that would save 12 lives. "I'm going in." Welcome to the Vietnam Stories. Before we tell this powerful story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from today. Maybe you can find a veteran like you in the comments. And if you believe stories like this need to be told, hit that subscribe button to help keep these stories. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell was the bright star of Charleston Harbor Coast Guard Station. At 32, an academy graduate, expert in modern rescue technologies. This morning, as Hurricane Isabella approached the coast, she had noticed an old man wandering around the station. Captain Frank Wilson, 71 years old, wearing a faded navy peacoat. His gray hair blowing in the wind. The faded patch on his left chest showed a silver star over a riverboat, its colors long lost. This was the emblem of the Mekong Delta River Patrol Unit from the Vietnam War. "Sir, can I help you?" Mitchell's voice was cold and distant. "This is a restricted area." Wilson looked her over, his pale blue eyes calm and assessing. "Just studying the charts," he said in his low, gravelly voice. "These waters? I've known them for a long time." "Mr." Mitchell paused. "Wilson, Frank Wilson," he said. "Mr. Wilson, we have emergency drills today. For your safety, I'll need you to leave the station," Mitchell said. Wilson smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. It was tired, sad. "Of course, young lady, of course." That morning, there were other incidents at the station. Young rescue specialist Petty Officer Jake Martinez had whispered to his friend Tommy Chen, "Who's that old guy? He's walking around like he owns the place." "Don't know," Chen had shrugged. "Probably some old-timer. These old folks are always chasing nostalgia." Lieutenant Rodriguez had let out a harsh laugh. "Bet that guy's never seen a real rescue operation in his life. Probably never done anything but fish." They were wrong. Frank Wilson had served in the Mekong Delta from 1969 to 1971, running river patrols with swift boats. But in those days, he hadn't just commanded war boats. He was also a tunnel rat, one of the few men who entered Viet Cong tunnels, learning to survive in narrow, dark, deadly labyrinths. He had learned to extract people from tight spaces, to find escape routes from seemingly impossible situations, to maintain his composure in places where he couldn't breathe. At noon, Hurricane Isabella hit Charleston with full force. Wind speeds 140 miles per hour, wave heights 25 feet. Ships in the harbor danced violently in the fierce wind. "Mayday! Mayday! Charleston Queen calling. Engine failure, taking on water. 12 men trapped below deck. Request immediate assistance." Mitchell grabbed the radio and ordered, "Rescue Team 1, proceed to Charleston Queen. Rodriguez, prepare the dive team." Frank Wilson stood in the small waiting area in the corner of the station. He had heard the radio conversation. He knew the Charleston Queen, an old cargo ship built in the 1980s. He knew the layout of her lower decks by heart. The rescue team moved quickly, but Mitchell heard the reports from the radio getting worse. Ship listing 15 degrees, water level rising, no exit from lower decks. "Engineer Thompson," Mitchell shouted. "How long can the ship last?" 20 minutes at most, Commander," Thompson replied, his face covered in sweat. "Then she'll be completely underwater." Mitchell's heart began to race. This was her first major rescue operation. Failure would mean the end of her career. When the team reached the pier, the situation was catastrophic. The Charleston Queen was listing dangerously, her lower decks underwater. Martinez and his team were preparing diving equipment. "Entry points blocked," Martinez's voice came over the radio. "Water pressure too high. Can't use standard diving procedures." "Use the rescue robot," Mitchell ordered. "Robots down, Commander. Electrical systems flooded." Mitchell looked at the ship in desperation. 12 people were about to die inside, and she had no options. "What's the technical analysis?" she shouted. Ship structure unstable, Engineer Thompson reported over radio. Any external intervention could accelerate collapse. Going inside would be suicide. At that moment, a calm voice came from behind. "With your permission, Commander." Mitchell turned. Frank Wilson stood there wearing old diving gear. The suit wasn't modern. From the 1970s, thick neoprene, heavy metal buckles. "What the hell are you doing?" Mitchell nearly screamed. "This is a rescue operation, not a tourist trip." "I know that ship's layout," Wilson replied calmly. "I consulted on her construction in 1983. There's a hidden exit compartment below deck, accessible from the main engineering section." "Hidden exit?" Rodriguez mocked. "This isn't a Hollywood movie, old man." "And you're not a diver," Mitchell added. "You have no license, no certification. You're too old for this work." Wilson looked at Mitchell, his eyes holding not anger but deep sadness. "Young lady, there are 12 people on that ship, and I know the only way to get them out." "Impossible," Mitchell said firmly. "Risk is too high." Against all protocols, Wilson heard the latest report from the radio. 17 minutes until complete submersion. Then Frank Wilson grabbed the oxygen tank and spoke the most decisive words of his career. "I'm going in." "No!" Mitchell blocked his way. "I won't allow it." Wilson stopped but didn't move away. Instead, he closed his eyes and traveled back in time for a moment. 1970 Mekong Delta. A Huey helicopter had crashed, pilot and co-pilot trapped in the muddy river. The helicopter was sinking. 3 minutes of time. Frank had heard no then too, from his commander, from his friends, even from his own mind. But he had gone. Dove into the muddy, dark water torn by rotor blades, extracted 2 men from the helicopter's collapsed cabin. That day he had saved 2 lives, and today he had no intention of losing 12. When he opened his eyes, he looked not at Mitchell but at the radio. "Charleston Queen, this is Wilson. I'm coming to you. Gather in the rear engineering section. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Mitchell in bewilderment. "Wilson? Who is this Wilson?" A voice came over the radio, old, broken. "My God, Frank Wilson? Safe Harbor Wilson?" This came from retired Captain Morrison, captain of the Charleston Queen. His voice was trembling, hopeful. "Yes, it's me," Wilson replied to the radio. "Boys," Morrison's voice went out to his crew. "Frank Wilson is coming. He'll get us out. It's Safe Harbor Wilson." "Who's Safe Harbor Wilson?" Martinez whispered. Old dock worker Eddie Kowalski shouted from the pier. "Kids, that man's a Charleston Harbor legend. In the 80s and 90s, he'd bring ships in safely, even in the worst storms. Hundreds of people are alive because of him." Mitchell looked at Wilson in confusion. You really are a pilot?" "Yes," Wilson replied simply. "And a tunnel rat. I learned to extract people from tight spaces in Vietnam." Engineer Thompson approached. "Wilson, ship structure is very unstable. Any wrong move could trigger collapse." Wilson nodded. "I've been inside that ship hundreds of times. I know every pipe, every passage, and I know how to move in tight spaces." "But your age," Mitchell began. "I'm 71, Wilson cut her off. "And that's enough experience for these 12 men. Just then the radio crackled again. "Mayday! Mayday! Water level rising! We can't breathe!" Wilson couldn't wait any longer. He put on his diving mask, adjusted his oxygen tank, and walked to the edge of the pier. "Wilson, stop!" Mitchell shouted. "This is suicide!" Wilson turned before entering the water. "Commander, I've come out of worse places in Vietnam. This is just a little water." And he jumped into the water. The underwater was dark and cold. Hurricane waves tossed him left and right, but Wilson was calm. He had experienced worse in the murky waters of the Mekong Delta. When he reached the main hull of the Charleston Queen, the situation was indeed bad. The ship was almost completely on her side, lower decks underwater. But Wilson knew his plan. He could enter through the main engineering section and use the personnel exit corridor to reach the trapped crew. The only problem was that corridor was completely flooded. He took a breath, dove, and entered the ship. Dark, cold, claustrophobic. Exactly like the tunnels in Vietnam. But Wilson didn't panic. With his flashlight, he found the way, passed through twisted metal pieces, swam through flooded corridors. Every step was dangerous, every movement threatened the ship's balance. Finally, he found them. 12 crew members had gathered in a small section at the rear of the ship, where an air pocket had formed, half underwater, half trying to breathe. "Wilson!" Captain Morrison shouted when he saw him. "Thank God." "What's your situation?" Wilson asked when he surfaced. "Two wounded. Johnson's leg is broken, Martinez is unconscious, the others are healthy but panicked." Wilson quickly assessed the situation. 12 people, narrow exit, limited oxygen. In Vietnam, when faced with similar situations, he had prioritized the wounded. "Listen," he said in an authoritative but calm voice. "I can't get you all out in one trip. I'll get the wounded out first, then come back for the others." But the ship could collapse. Young crew member Steve Crawford shouted in panic. Wilson looked at him, his eyes holding both sternness and compassion. "Son, I know how this ship will collapse better than you do, and you don't know how I'll get you out. Trust me." He lifted Johnson onto his shoulder, adjusted his oxygen tank, and dove back into the water. The return journey was even harder. He was carrying an injured man, the ship had listed further. But Wilson was experienced. In Vietnam, too, he had carried wounded, injured friends. When he surfaced, the Coast Guard team greeted him with applause. Mitchell ran to his side. "Wilson, what's the situation?" 11 more people," Wilson replied breathlessly but determinedly. "I'm going back down." "No!" Mitchell blocked him. "Too dangerous. The ship could collapse any moment." Wilson gently but firmly moved her hand away. "Commander, there are 11 more people. I'm going." On his second trip, he brought out Martinez. The unconscious man couldn't breathe underwater. Wilson kept him alive with mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, brought him to the surface. Then on the third trip, 3 more people. Fourth trip, 2 people. Fifth trip, the last 3 people. Each time the ship collapsed a little more. Each time Wilson grew a little more tired, but he didn't give up. On his last trip, only Captain Morrison and 1 crew member remained. As Wilson took them, the ship shuddered with a serious groan and swayed greatly. "Wilson!" Morrison shouted into the radio. "Ship's collapsing, get out now!" Wilson calmly replied, "Taking the last 2, then we're coming out." And he did it. He brought Morrison and the last crew member to the surface. Exactly 3 minutes later, the Charleston Queen was completely underwater. On the pier, 12 rescued people had gathered around Wilson. Some were crying, some trying to hug him. Mitchell approached him, deep respect and shame mixed in her eyes. "Wilson, I'm sorry. I misjudged you." Wilson looked at her, filled with understanding rather than anger. "Commander, you were just doing your job. I was just doing mine." "But how did you know?" Young rescue specialist Martinez asked. "The ship plans, exit routes, everything?" Wilson smiled. "Because in my youth I worked on the construction of those ships. And in Vietnam I learned to extract people from tight spaces. Tunnel rat, they called us." "Tunnel rat?" Rodriguez asked in amazement. "Soldiers who entered Viet Cong tunnels. Dark, narrow, deadly places, but it taught us to survive. And to save others," Wilson said. Chief Petty Officer Williams approached, holding a folder. "Wilson, I just checked. Vietnam War, Brown Water Navy, Swift Boat Commander, Silver Star, Bronze Star, Navy Cross, and..." He paused. "Harbor Pilot License, Charleston Harbor, 1978-2015, 37 years of perfect service record." Silence fell. The young Coast Guard team looked at Wilson no longer as an old, frail man, but as a living legend. Tommy Chen stepped forward. "Mr. Wilson, I apologize for mocking you. I didn't know." Wilson looked at Chen. "Son, you just made mistakes because you're young. I made the same mistakes when I was your age. The important thing is to learn." Mitchell formally. "Wilson, that performance was extraordinary. Would you consider returning to the Coast Guard?" Wilson laughed, a genuine smile. "Commander, I'm 71 years old. But if there's an emergency and you need me, I'm here." The following week, a small ceremony was held at Charleston Harbor Coast Guard Station, a ceremony to present Wilson with an honorary Coast Guard badge. Mitchell said in her speech, "Friends, we learned something important this week. Courage comes with age, but wisdom is gained only through experience. And real heroes are always on standby." When Wilson spoke, the entire station listened quietly. "Young people, I want to tell you something. Rescue operations aren't just technology and modern equipment. It's the value placed on human life. It's experience. And most importantly, it's listening to each other." He paused. "I learned in Vietnam that survival isn't just about being strong. It's about listening to each other. Experience comes from age, wisdom comes from open-mindedness." Jake Martinez raised his hand. "Mr. Wilson, do you have any request from us?" Wilson smiled. "The next time you see an old man, listen first, judge later. Because our stories might save your life." A new plaque was hung on the station wall. The Wilson rule: respect experience, be ready to learn from everyone. That night, Mitchell called her husband. "Today I worked with a real hero and almost missed him. I think I need to learn to show more respect to the elderly." This story became legend at Charleston Coast Guard. Every young Coast Guard learns the story of Frank Safe Harbor Wilson and understands. Real heroes don't always wear uniforms, but they're always ready. This wasn't just a rescue operation. This is a lesson about intergenerational respect, the value of experience and humility. So do you have a Captain Wilson in your life? Someone whose weathered hands hold decades of harbor knowledge, but whose voice is dismissed as just another old-timer? Share their stories in the comments. Tell us about the Wilson in your community. The one whose tunnel rat experience from Vietnam could save lives today, whose obsolete knowledge might be exactly what someone desperately needs. The one who gets dismissed as senile until the moment their expertise becomes irreplaceable. If this story moved you, subscribe and share, because sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the only one who knows the hidden exit. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, if you see someone with a faded Navy peacoat studying the charts, remember, they might know every pipe, every passage, every escape route that could save lives. You just have to be humble enough to listen.